Howdy everyone, Cowb here, back with another video talking about Arc Warlock. A few months ago I made a video about Arc Warlock and how I thought that it wasn't as interesting and it didn't really feel like it had a place in the game, and Bungie has released an article and I want to go over a bit of a TLDR of what's happening to Arc come next season and how I think that's going to affect Arc Warlock, and just some, I guess, thoughts on what has changed in my head like since that last video. That's a weird thing to explain, but just I guess my view of Arc Warlock since then. So first things first, Arc across the board is getting this thing called Bolt Charge. Now you can think of Bolt Charge as a buff that you build up on your body and then you release it on a target. So it's not like an ignition where you build the stacks on the targets, you build the stacks on yourself and then you transfer it to a different target, which may, in my head, that makes me think that you can have multiple bolt charges go off at a time, which might be really strong in endgame, especially with the Titan Barricade, but I don't know how much that Titan Barricade is going to be really worth using. Regardless, let's continue on. So there's this new Arc verb called Bolt Charge. You summon powerful Arc Lightning to opponents, and it's built into Arc 3.0. Some is built better than others, but generally speaking, it is built into Arc. For Warlock specifically, we're getting a new buddy called an Ionic Sentry. Now this Sentry works like Gunpowder Gamble, in which it is activated by your grenade, but you need to build it up first before you can throw it. And what an Ionic Sentry will do is that it will blind nearby enemies and then it will chain lightning in between them. Now when an Ionic Sentry defeats a target, we get Bolt Charge. So it's a really good way to build up Bolt Charge really fast, and I think that it builds Bolt Charge on hits as well, so I think you can double up. I'm not quite sure. We'll play with it a bit more, but I think in this video in which they show it off, they build up a lot of Bolt Charge with like 4 enemies, so I could be wrong, but I feel like I'm right. I don't know. More Arc specific stuff for Warlock is we're going to get a 20% damage buff on Storm Trance against non-champions, and then a 15% damage increase with Chaos Reach against non-champions. I don't know if that includes bosses, but if that does include bosses, that is an overall net positive. In addition to that, Lightning Surge will no longer grant Amplify on cast, but instead will grant a Bolt Charge per enemy hit with Lightning Surge, while also increasing its damage by 30%. That will make it a even stronger option on Prismatic, but I don't know if it's going to be worth using with the new aspect on base Arc, but Lightning Surge builds on base Arc are stronger now. However, I still think Lightning Surge is going to be objectively better on Prismatic. Up next, while you're amplified, you have a buff on you that makes enemies less accurate towards you. It works similar to the Manticore's exotic effect, and you also have 15% damage resist against PvE combatants. So you're getting hit less, and then if you do get hit, it's doing less damage. So it's a double buff in the amplified field. Spark of Discharge, when picking up an Ionic Trace, you now get a stack of Bolt Charge, which will be very powerful for Arc Warlocks, as Ionic Traces are a lot of their gameplay. Spark of Momentum, you now, when you slide over a brick of ammo, you get a Bolt Charge, and they remove the melee bonus that you get from sliding over the ammo because Bolt Charges actually give you melee energy. They've also reduced the amount of time that it needs to take to trigger this, so if that was a problem for you, it is now fixed. Spark of Frequency, when amplified, gain a bonus stack of Bolt Charge from all sources in addition to all previous effects, which is going to be really strong. Spark of Volts, finishers will now grant Bolt Charge in addition to gain amplified, and Spark of Ions, defeated targets with Bolt Charge will now make Ionic Trace in addition to previous effects. Covered everything. What are my thoughts on Arc Warlock going into Heresy? When I saw these changes, I wanted to put them into test in game prior to it coming out. So I throw on Aerostatic Mine because I think this will probably be the best aspects to use alongside the new one. Now I have Lightning Surge on because it just doesn't activate if you don't use it. So I don't really slide melee a lot on Stormcaller, so I don't really have to deal with this issue of like muscle memory being built. So what I have on for right now is Spark of Ions, Spark of Discharge, Spark of Shock, and Spark of Resist, because you objectively want to have more DR on the subclass. However, let's say you're crazy and you don't want to have more DR, Spark of Frequency. This will give you another bolt charge stack every time you get one. And with Spark of Ions and with Aerostatic Mine, we're getting a lot of traces. So defeating a jolted target creates an Ionic Trace. Arc Weapon Final Blows have a chance to create an Ionic Trace. And then defeating targets who are jolted creates an Ionic Trace. So that's 3 Ionic Traces from one source. Now what can that source be? Well, typically it's going to be a weapon. Not this weapon specifically, but something like this. It's 2 right there. Another 2. Another one. Another 2. Another 2. And you guys get it. It's a lot of Ionic Traces. So we're going to be having Bolt Charge pretty fast with this build. In fact, we're probably going to have one of the highest uptimes on Bolt Charge. And like I said earlier, if you wanted to, you could put on Frequency to where those stacks build up way faster. Or honestly, you could get rid of Spark of Shock, right? You can get rid of Spark of Shock, you put on Frequency, then you replace it with your Pulse Nade, something like Flashbang Grenade, since that comes back a little bit faster. Unfortunately, you're unable to enhance this weapon to where you can get something like Synergy, where Final Blows of this weapon have a chance to create an elemental pickup matching its damage type. So what are some exotics that I think will be very good for this upcoming change to Arc Warlock? An obvious one is going to be Fallen Sunstar. You're just going to be having a ton of stats, and it'll also benefit your allies. So overall, it's a win-win. That's an easy one to say. Now, we could use Crown of Tempest. I think that is an okay option. I don't think it's necessarily good or bad. It's good if you want to use Storm Trance, and it just will allow you to spam your flash grenade more often. It'll allow you to use your ball of lightning. However, that's about it. And that's not necessarily bad, but it's just not as synergistic as some other builds for Arc Warlock already are. I wouldn't say your flash grenade is going to be that important to where you need to build it up in a way for kind of Tempest, ball of lightning as well. I don't think it's too worth it. Next is going to be Felwinter's Helm. I know this one is a pretty common one to throw on Arc Warlock. I don't feel like this exotic is as strong as a lot of people want it to be. I could see its benefits, especially with its 30% weaken. Now with this new bolt charge thing, your bolt charges will be doing a ton of damage, which does sound cool on paper, but I do think it is a bit unpractical to play with. However, there are things coming to where you can have more melee energy with more bolt charges, so this could see some use. Let's say you get 10% melee energy every time you get a bolt charge, and we're using the current build that we're using, and you're getting Ionic Traces with those stacks. That's, let's say, 25 energy per Ionic Trace / bolt charge that you get. You can spam your abilities a lot, so this could be an option. But it's similar to Crown of Tempest, to where I think there are better arc builds to be had. A bit of a controversial one, but I think Karnstein armlets would be a good option. You see, Arc has no healing whatsoever, so if you give it a form of healing, I think it's gonna be good for your class. While it is not the most powerful option, at least it'll keep you alive, which is a struggle on Arc. Getaway Artist could be a good option as well. I believe that this is better on Prismatic. However, it is still going to be strong in this area. While you won't be able to get any benefits from using grenade-like abilities at all, if you use Getaway Artist alongside this new aspect, you will get a lot of benefits of having a juiced up Arc Soul, which refunds itself, on top of having a grenade, a secondary grenade that blinds targets and a chain lightnings them. So if you really want to play the buddy playstyle, Getaway Artists are the move. Esper of Radius, I think, is probably going to be the best exotic to use. And the reason why I say that is because it allows you to do arc explosions with your rift, allows you to blind with your rift when you're using an arc super, and also it regenerates your super when you're surrounded by targets, which builds into the aspect, which gives you more survivability when you're surrounded by targets. Stacking this with this just is very synergistic. And on top of that, you can place out a healing rift to where you're not dying every 2 seconds and you actually have some health. You can combine this with a Reaper mod where you can get a kill, pick up an orb. Now you're healing a bit more, and it flows all really well together. I think this is probably the best pick. However, there still is another one we can talk about. For those that are more interested in the 20% buff that Stormtrace is going to get, Stormdancer's Brace, if this was your favorite exotic, it is now going to be even better. Now, while I still believe that this is better on Prismatic, it still isn't a terrible option, especially since it refunds your super energy. Given that it is a roaming super, those are hot right now, especially with its 3 times multiplier buff that it got recently. I can honestly see a lot of Arc Warlocks still using this, but I still think it is going to be used on Transcendence Warlocks, Prismatic Warlocks, now that it has become fixed on Transcendence. With these changes in mind, how much has changed for Arc Warlock? In my opinion, things have definitely gotten better. While it's not at the level which I would want them to be at, it is at a better level than before. Having more melee opportunities for Arc Warlock is nice. Allows you to build into that playstyle a bit more, since the other 2 classes seem to play into that heavily. Now, the only thing that Warlock is missing that the other 2 have is innate healing, but as of right now, Warlocks are in a pretty good position. Who knows, maybe the ideal playstyle is to go more range for Arc Warlock rather than up close and personal like the other 2 class would suggest. And it does make sense that healing does not exist on Arc for Warlock, because there are things like Spark of Instinct, where when you get critically wounded, you jolt enemies with Arc energy, alongside Spark of Recharge. While critically wounded, your melee and grenade energy recharge more quickly. That leans heavily into more of the Titan and the Hunter playstyle to a degree. So it makes sense that Arc Warlock wouldn't have healing innately, because the class itself isn't about healing in general. I'm excited to see where the class goes. If it improves, that's a big benefit. If it just slightly gets a little bit better, I mean, it's some form of progress, but objectively speaking, all these changes are a net positive rather than any negative, and who knows, maybe there'll be an article later this week that dives even further, or there might be an armor sets come year 11 of this game where you want to actually not be at full health, you want to be critically wounded, you want to get hit, and maybe that'll be really good for Arc Warlock where it won't be as good for Arc Titan and Arc Hunter. Who knows? Regardless of what happens, I'm excited to see what is next for this class, and that's going to be it for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.